Today I'm reviewing Interview with the Vampire, Season 2, Episode 4, I Want You More Than Anything in the World. We're at the halfway mark for this show, and it's going real slowly. Ignoring episode 1 as it's kind of like a self-contained part 2 moment, we've had 3 episodes of building, and really not much of anything has happened. And the worst part for me is supposedly in the next episode, we're going to take a hard pause on this part of the story to discuss what's going on between Daniel and Louis in the original interview, which yes, I wanted those answers, but no, I didn't want us to interrupt the theater story to get them. But let's use that normal review format, starting with the characters. Daniel makes a critical error here when he asks about the theater fire since the vampires hadn't revealed it. He tries to correct this flub by saying his research team came back to him so they don't know about the hacking. Armand stares at him suspiciously, but apparently doesn't read his mind. And it's at this point I want to bring up how confused I am about the telepathy power and the mind reading thing going on in the vampire world. It seems like it works or doesn't work based off of what the story needs. If we're talking about it in relation to the book, Armand always had really strong mind manipulation and invasive mental powers. He pretty much could read anyone's mind at any time, and in fact that like invasion into mental space is what he valued most in relationships. So if he couldn't do it, he would be really perturbed. But here Armand either can't do it or doesn't care to do it for unknown reasons because they just awkwardly continue the interview. Daniel is having more and more flashbacks to what happened in the first interview, and I guess we're gonna get a full rundown of that in the next episode. And I guess also Daniel is questioning both what happened at that time and perhaps like how he's perceived things going forward, if this is some kind of like memory blockage or secret reveal. Moving into Armand, it seems like modern day he's playing some kind of game with both Daniel and Louis. I'm curious to know if Louis is aware of the game or not. Like, he knows about the diary pages they removed from Claudia's diary and the reason they did that in theory, but he doesn't know about the weird mix-up with the photographs. It seems like it had to be intentional on Armand's part. The previews for the next episode seem to imply that Louis is not 100% aware of what happened in the first interview. And also, if we go back to season 1, it seems like it's just revealed to him that Lestat isn't dead after their big escapade at the close of that season, which might indicate that Armand cut those pages from Claudia's diary to make Louis forget certain things. All of which goes back to like Armand is a master manipulator in this situation, and perhaps both Daniel and Louis being pawns. It is a little bit hard to 100% commit to that theory because when Louis discusses how present Lestat was when he and Armand were first courting, Armand looks crushed and heartbroken and sincerely surprised and devastated to learn how strong and present those hallucinations were. It feels like Lestat is like an ever-growing, looming threat. Past Armand's actions combined with the interpretation modern Armand puts on those actions sort of gives us a lot of information about his personality, and it suggests that he's very selfish, self-centered, proud of what he did in the Théâtre des Vampires, so proud that he doesn't admit fault or problem with anything he did, even in present day. Like, he loves that Lulu play, refuses to admit the damage it did to Claudia and that it was potentially responsible for Claudia's death. He also refuses to admit any culpability in breaking up his vampire coven, sowing discord, and not appropriately handling it, all based off the success of that one play. Why? Because people liked it and he created something like artistic and successful and he wanted that. He was proud of stuff that was like barely passing muster and that only Americans will come see. So the fact that like he got the Parisian modern audience back seems to be like one of his biggest achievements, bigger even than his relationship with him and Louis. And it's one thing to me, like in the moment, for him to have that pride and joy, and another thing entirely for him to be in the modern day and still see no issues with that in hindsight, or like no moral dilemmas or lines he crossed. Gonna be a red flag for me that Armand still sees nothing wrong with what happened in the past and discusses it with affection. We do finally get Armand talking about his maker, which is something that he does in Interview with the Vampire, the book, although it's significantly briefer. And we get a lot fuller history of it in Armand's book in the Vampire Chronicles later on. I appreciate like the love and joy we get to see in Armand's face when he's talking about Marius. Their relationship in book feels very pure and genuine, and having even just the little briefest glimpse of that is nice on screen. They do alter Armand's backstory to make Marius continue to pimp him out, which I don't like. Is a huge mischaracterization of who Marius is and what he does. Arguably, Marius is one of the few, perhaps the only good vampires in canon. He would never have whored Armand out the way Armand says he did in the show. In fact, he has a whole bunch of boyhood artist apprentices that he's sort of like fostering and sending to school and giving a good life to. Originally, he purchased Armand to sort of like mold him into a companion, and almost immediately realized he couldn't do that, and he loved the boy too much. The only reason Armand ends up being a vampire at all is because he gets into a sword fight with a blade that was poisoned, and he's dying by the time Marius wakes up, and his only option for any kind of existence is through vampirism. We'll need more of the show, some scenes from Marius's perspective, to see if this is ever corrected or see if this is the new direction they're going with Marius's character. But I would say that Armand's backstory is more than tragic enough without adding in like a cruelty of a master that he loves but was also mean to him. It's enough that he found kindness once in his life with Marius and then had it ripped away and thrown into this dark satanic cult. My biggest takeaway though with Armand is confusion about how important the cult is or isn't to him. When he first describes meeting Lestat, he explains about the satanic cult, how he knew it wasn't true, and how he wanted to end the cult in show. But then once Lestat actually successfully ends the cult, he continues with the traditions by himself and is like a sad loner that needs Lestat to come bring the cult together as a vampire coven for art now instead of the devil, which implies to me that he likes leading the cult, he likes being in charge, and he likes being the boss. So I kind of like overlooked the discrepancy between him saying the Satanism thing wasn't real but continuing the practice after the vampires left, just as like a weird thing the show did that didn't make sense. But I'm coming back to it now because he says to Louis that he never wanted to be in charge of the vampire coven, he doesn't want to be the leader, and he'd like to leave his responsibilities with the Theatre des Vampires behind. But if that's the case, then why did he pick it up again with Lestat all those years ago? And why doesn't he give the job over to Santiago, who clearly wants it? Why didn't he just pick up with Claudia and Louis and leave? And for me, this is another discrepancy with the show where it's like forcing plotline, specific line phrasing, and elements of the book into the show when they've created a character that's really separate and different. So it's fine that Armand is an active leader in the coven and seems to like being the boss, but then you can't incorporate the book lines about him never wanting to be a coven leader and detesting the role he's in. Personally, I thought him being into the coven was an interesting dynamic that created a new push and pull he didn't have in the books. But instead of rolling with that, we're like shoving him back into the container he was in as part of the book, and it just doesn't work. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. Does the show understand what it's doing? Does the show understand the text that they're interpreting and transforming into this alternate universe? Like, so many questions and suspicions come into play, and then I have to wonder if I can trust the creators, or if it's a narration thing, or like at what level have things critically failed. Moving into the Vampire Coven, it's getting a huge popularity revival thanks to this Lulu play, and it seems like most of the coven does not appreciate being the center of attention by humans. I think they liked being cast to like the outskirts and doing their own gothy vampire thing, and I don't think they love the scrutiny if it has to come from like a cheerful, perky, little girl style play. I honestly think almost all the vampires detest that role as much as Claudia does. The only person who seems to like the attention, praise, and positive reception is Armand, which of course turns the coven against Claudia temporarily until she explains that she also hates being Lulu and it also damages her. And then they kind of like rally around her and against Armand, which brings Santiago back into being the main antagonistic figurehead. In the book, Santiago is often the instigator of all Louis Lucy and Claudia's issues. In the background moving parts, we come to understand that it's actually Armand and Lestat, and they're just using Santiago as the messenger. And it seems like here in the show, they're giving Santiago more charge and control and motivation over all of that. I understand why the actor who's playing that role is doing an excellent job. Santiago is a lot of fun to watch on screen, like maneuvering and politicking and all that stuff. Kind of has this vibe to me that's like a mix of like an older Draco Malfoy crossed with like Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, all with like this posh British charm that kind of like smooths over his manipulative elements. And while it's perfectly obvious to the audience what's going on, and probably obvious to most of the other vampires in the Coven, it's understandable that Claudia, both because she's new and also because she's a young teen, like striving for that connection, just doesn't see it coming. I'm really excited to see how this betrayal unfolds. I guess it'll be in the back 2 episodes. I'm a little concerned that we're not going to see a return of Lestat here in the back episodes. Like in the book, Louis and Claudia get captured by the Coven of Vampires, and when they come back to their home base, there's Lestat, alive and mostly well, making claims against the two of them, which is why they get punished for attempting to kill their maker. Santiago is the judge and the executioner, but it's Lestat as the instigating figure that pulls all this into motion. The surprise of his return, the knowledge he's still alive, and the culpability he holds for Claudia's destruction are all important to his character and his relationship with Louis going forward. So pulling him out of all of that is upsetting for me. But you know, we'll have to see. Perhaps Santiago is doing all these machinations, and then they're gonna get a significant help when Lestat pops out of a bush and like just makes everything plain to the Coven. Moving into Louis. Moment of wild speculation, but potentially this person who's claiming to be Louis might not actually be Louis. I see this going possibly 2 ways. 1, we find out that everything that's happening right now is actually a delusion in Daniel's head, and Armand has been playing with him the whole time. And then possibility part 2, Armand and Louis did break up like they do in the books, and Armand is so broken up about it that he finds another vampire and mentally shapes them to be what he needs in Louis, and then makes him pretend to be Louis, which explains all of Louis's like inconsistencies and like mental lapses that are very uncharacteristic of the vampire that we get to know in the books. I don't know any more than you guys do. It's just a theory. Whatever the case is, it seems like there's trouble in paradise between Armand and Louis. As we close this episode out with the two of them arguing over the photographs, and it looks like once Louis discovers what happened in the original interview, there will probably be more arguing going forward. Jumping back to Louis' time in Paris, the face he makes when he sees Claudia on stage, like that combined sorrow, remorse, empathy, sympathy for her, it's crushing. And then that like little "I'm humoring you" smile he gives to Armand, where he secretly hates the plays. The emotion is great there. It gives you so much that the dialogue doesn't. Generally, I liked the arc that Louis is following in discovering himself through artwork, where he comes to find out that no matter how hard he tries, he doesn't have the artistic eye that other people in his generation do. It feels like there's this parallel line going on between he and Armand, where both of them want to take pride in their art and want to make great things and sort of discover themselves through that. Where Armand is having a moment of success, Louis is getting everything reconfirmed that he can't do that. And when you look at the actual products for both of them, you can see that they're just not working. They're pale imitations of what humanity can create. And even though vampires have increased time to work on their skill, they have better senses and are able to more accurately predict things, they're just not able to capture that moment of life because they're forever outside it. And this is a reoccurring theme in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, where a lot of vampires are aspiring artists in some way, shape, or form. And even though everything they create is technically beautiful or perfect, it lacks that something special special that human art has that makes it worthwhile to look at and of value. So I appreciate that soft echo here. I also appreciate a little bit breakdown of like the arrogance of the artist, where like Louis is poo-pooing Armand's stuff, thinking that his work is elevated and better somehow, and then he gets like shot down and has that irrational high level of anger as a result. All of that I feel like is a nice little microcosm of a whole bunch of things that you could pick apart and have fun with. I made a note here that Louis has the fire gift and he's the last vampire in the world who needs that. That guy burns so many things down. It's concerning that it's easier for him to do that now more than ever. Also, I don't really understand Armand and Louis' relationship. Like, I don't know what it's founded on. And this episode spends a lot of time with the two of them bonding, like challenging each other and pushing each other for more or less. They have a will, they won't they. None of that felt real or relatable or based on like any kind of foundation for me. So it's very weird to have like an hour-long episode that kind of dives into that, and I come out like shoulder shruggy, more confused now than I was when we went in. It really feels to me like Louis chooses Armand because that's what we need to make the story move forward. And it's like a foregone conclusion because we know that Louis and Armand are together present day. There's not a ton of time dedicated to Louis and Claudia's relationship, but I do think they get some really sweet, memorable moments when they're all sitting around the dinner table and Louis is explaining what draws him to photography and why he loves Paris so much, and Claudia is really happy for him and really wistful, looking for that same kind of inspiration and draw. That's wonderful to me. There's this great little like mirrored moment because last episode she was really invested in the coven and Louis was like wistfully happy for her. And of course their big blow up at the end where Claudia realizes all of her efforts were doomed from the start, and like their you and me and you conversation, great. I love that that came back. Moving into Claudia, I do think the Lulu play does a great job like encapsulating all of Claudia's trauma into like one little moment. All excellent, like great little way to pick apart the pain and her experience there. I appreciate that Claudia started sabotaging those performances and that she was open and honest with Armand when he asked what was wrong. That was a great opportunity for Armand to change course. And it also easily explains how she gets separated from the coven, how even though she and Santiago sort of kind of have like an on again, off again friendship, she needs more validation from an outside source. It can't be Louis anymore. He's too busy with Armand. So she ends up hanging out with Madeleine. I like the moment we get between her and Madeleine where they're like bonding with each other's shared pain, their bad decisions, their like own cycles, and kind of like encouraging each other to go on and find happiness and like get to the better part of their life cycle. It's really sweet, and in the books you have to assume that Claudia and Madeleine had moments of bonding that obviously would have been different than this one, but like we don't get to see anything at all. So sort of like building out that moment, part of what's fun about a show like this. All of which brings me to Madeleine. I think her new character is really uninspired. There's not a lot going on in the book with her, and most of what she has we can't do in this new version because it like very closely relates to Claudia looking like an 8-year-old girl. So the show could have done anything they wanted with Madeleine, and they decided to make her a woman who has an affair with a Nazi soldier in occupied Paris. I guess kudos to the show because they didn't make her a woman who was repeatedly assaulted by a Nazi soldier in an occupied Paris. Like, that's a way they could have gone, and then made all the female characters assault survivors for fucking reasons that make no sense. At the same time, I can't help but remember the reason we have a different version of Louis is because no one apparently wanted to hear about an 1800s white slave owner in a semi-sympathetic way, which, you know, like valid, but along the same lines, why do we want to hear about a woman who humanizes a Nazi soldier and has an affair with him while he's occupying her home city? Like, what is the thinking with that? Is it just that people who make bad choices become outsiders and then become vampires in this show? Do you have to be some kind of like outsider dreg of society to become a vampire? Are we like implying something about vampirism and choices people make and how they end up places? Is it entirely unintentional? And another thing that's an issue here is there's not a lot of female characters in the show, and all of them are kind of portrayed like very flatly catty, fighting each other, all surrounding their identity with a man. I don't love that for us. Don't get me wrong, I love my girl Claudia. She's doing great work for us. She's a decently complex character. But like, if we look at Estelle and the other girl in the Vampire Coven, they don't get along with her because they're catty girls, I guess. And Estelle and the other women are fighting because Santiago went from sleeping with one of them to sleeping with the other one. If we look at Antoinette from the last version, all she wants to do is have an affair with Lestat and have him alter herself. And now we're here with Madeleine, and literally all we know about her is she's snarky with Claudia and decided to sleep with a Nazi soldier while Paris was occupied. What are these flat women portrayals in this show? And then moving into Lestat. I guess we're saying goodbye to Hallucination Lestat this episode. They did a great job making an arc for Ghost Lestat that made me feel almost sad he was going away. Like, he's very sweet when he's pointing out the flaws in Louis' photography and suggesting ways that Louis can improve it. And it does a great job of reminding viewers of the moments where Lestat and Louis' relationship worked, where Lestat was supportive in ways that Armand never has been and presumably never will be. And it also does a great job reminding us of the ways that Lestat was like fairly simple and easy to please, where Armand demands a lot of things of Louis and like the relationship is significantly more complicated than his and Lestat's was. At the same time, I'm terrified this is the last we're gonna see of Sam Raimi in this season, because it doesn't look like Lestat is coming back in the flesh, so to speak, to like accuse Claudia and Louis of trying to kill him, and I'm kind of upset. Moving into specific scenes, Louis and Daniel take another hit at trying to explain the vampire bond. This isn't something in the Anne Rice books. And honestly, I think they further convolute it and complicate it in ways that make it make less sense and make it less justifying. As originally in season 1, when they bring up the vampire bond, it's a reason that Louis goes back to Lestat after the abuse. He can't help it. There's a bond that pulls each other together. And ignoring the fact that Claudia doesn't seem to feel any such bond to Lestat, it does imply the vampire bond is specifically between a made vampire and their maker. But then here, Louis says he was severing the bond between him and Lestat and forging a new one with Armand. If you can just transfer the bond to whoever, whenever, then that's not really a special bond, any different than like the bonds that humans create between each other, like family bonds or relationship bonds, period. There's nothing supernatural or magical about it that makes you have to overlook abuse or that compels you to feel some kind of way. So this line here makes episode 6 in season 1 even worse than it was before, and also just invites more questions and speculations about this new made-up vampire bond element in the show, period. Next is the Santiago mimicking Louis face-off moment. We originally got this in the book when Santiago and Louis first meet each other, and Louis gets an invite into the Theater of Vampires, portrayed as like eerie, scary, highly tense. And seeing it play out in the show, even in this new form, was really fun. It has like this uncanny, a little bit supernatural, eerie element to it because Santiago is so good at mimicking Louis. Although in this case, because Louis knows Santiago and because it seems like Louis is stronger than Santiago despite Santiago's huge power up here, it's less scary and tense. But we do get that moment of Louis shouting buffoon, even though if it's a little bit different. We get like that context of the two of them hating each other, and we get that mimicry and that ability of vampires. Also, I love it because it's repeating like this idea about vampires' inability to make art that has any element of life in it. They can perfectly mimic things to an impressive, uncanny level, but they can't create anything new. And I think in this way, vampires do create an interesting metaphor when we're talking about their ability for art that you might get with something like AI. It can mimic things, it can collate things, it can make conclusions, it can even make new things like Armand does with Lulu, but none of them ever become like more notable or having of that special spark that you would see in like a human done creation. And lastly, the scene where Armand takes Louis to the Louvre is also something we would see in the book. However, it's after Louis has destroyed the Theater of Vampires. Louis asks Armand to take him there, and they have like a sad moment together before they agree to be traveling companions. Here, it's Armand offering to take him to the Louvre like on a rando date and like trying to show more information about himself. I guess it's a cool thing to show, and it's a cool scene, especially because we can introduce a painting that Marius donated that actually is of Armand as a human. I think the scene itself does a lot for the episode, as well as like being a nice callback to something that happened in the book. The context of the book is gone as Louis no longer appreciates this kind of art. In a lot of ways, for me, this scene with the Louvre actually shows that Armand and Louis in the show are not at all alike and have no common thread. So like as a courting scene, it fails, but as a way to introduce more Armand lore in a way that does like some showing along with the telling, I think it's kind of nice. Moving into those themes. Memory is a monster. Daniel has some more flashes of Armand from the original interview. This is like continuing to give us that foreshadow of what's happening in the next episode, and also, you know, playing into that whole what we do or don't remember kind of element. The misplaced photos are also building into that first interview, and perhaps building into a plot that Armand has, like manipulating Louis's mind or maybe manipulating Daniel's mind. And like additionally, there's discrepancies in how Armand is remembering things versus how Louis is remembering things. Like Armand has these rose-tinted glasses, everything was great, and Louis has what we're led to believe is the actual truth of the matter. The For Vampires, the Who Am I Supposed to Love theme comes in heavy here. The majority of the episode is dedicated to a lukewarm will they won't they between Louis and Armand, where we already know they will. But there's also the continued hunt for Claudia's Who Am I Supposed to Love as the person who originally said this line. She started out with the Vampire Coven, things have turned sour there, and now she's turned to Madeleine. And even there, where the two of them have that moment of genuine connection, when Madeleine has to step away because her period has started and she is bleeding everywhere, Claudia begins to realize that Madeleine's humanity is going to keep the two of them separated, and that she can't really become friends with her either. She doesn't have an opportunity to fully explore that idea before Armand comes and like breaks up the party, but there is this push and pull of like Claudia still not really having anyone to love or any one neat place to fit. And then the push and pull of this is not a life and that's because you took my life is super strong in this episode. We do get a really good push and pull here between Louis and Armand during their courtship, where like Armand wants Louis to be part of the coven because that would make things easier for him, and he is in this like very difficult position where the coven wants him to do certain things and to enforce rules against Louis, but Louis insists on remaining outside the coven, and that's like not really a life for him. But a life without either the coven or Louis is also not acceptable to Armand for whatever reasons. And Claudia is also feeling like a similar pull back and forth. Being Lulu in these plays is not a life for her, but a life without the coven is also impossible at this stage. So her trying to make peace with what her body physically looks like versus who she is on the inside, her trying to find peace with the coven and community versus like the infighting and the cattiness and the jealousy, is like this pull against her that we're really feeling. And that's going to be all my thoughts and feelings for season 2, episode 4 of Interview with the Vampire. Talk to me in those comments down below. Are you still watching the show? And if so, what was your favorite scene in this episode? And as always, keep reading.